So the third part of our painters from the Netherlands, and in the last two we talked about Calvinism and Protestantism and the wealth of the Netherlands from slavery or from the merchants, and we talked about Rembrandt and Hals and the difference between their painting styles. You can see on this timeline all of the people we've discussed thus far. There's Caravaggio at the beginning, that big beacon. Rubens, you watched the video about the Medici cycle. Van Dyck and his paintings of the coming Civil War. We talked about Rembrandt in the last one with the Night Watch and how it was neither the night nor a watch. And we went into great detail about Las Meninas by Velázquez. So today we're talking about Vermeer, Rhys Dale, Leicester, and a few others, and even a precursor, a Bruegel. We'll talk about Bruegel. So here we go. So I just want to quickly remind you of this spectrum of more important to less important works of art. And as we'll see today, genre scenes, landscapes, still lifes, animal paintings, we're going to look at a lot of those, and we're going to talk about why those were important in the Netherlands. Now, first of all, we already discussed Calvin and predestination and economic success as an outward sign of salvation. There was the rise of the middle class, which allowed early forms of capitalism to create more wealth for people. This was a product of trade, mostly from slavery. The break from the Catholic Church, and so they weren't giving all their money to the Catholic Church anymore. And that artists were painting less religious scenes because the lack of church and royal patronage and the iconoclastic nature of Calvinism, which is another thing we talked about, which is where you don't paint pictures of Jesus and Mary and all the saints because there's this fear that you're going to be worshiping the image as opposed to the idea. But those aren't the only reasons that these lower rungs of the hierarchy were so popular. We'll see that people excelled at them, and we'll ask the question, how come they're doing this? And what's really interesting is that these scenes used to be just kind of throwaway elements of painting. And it was like what the apprentices would cut their teeth on. I'm going to paint this important thing, you make the trees in the background. But Dutch painters inverted that idea and emphasized what was once seen as unimportant and gave them prominence in painting. The guy who started this trend was Peter Bruegel the Elder. There's a lot of Bruegels. They're all descendants of this guy, though, Bruegel the Elder. What Bruegel did was he made what was seen as important secondary, and then he emphasized the lower elements. For example, in this painting, the Holy Family are, Jesus, Mary, etc. They are dwarfed by the larger creation of God or the landscape. So Bruegel was saying, yes, the Holy Family is important, but God made all of this, and let's emphasize this as well. Here's another Bruegel painting, and I'm going to sort of digress a bit and talk about this, even though it's not Baroque. And it emphasizes a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today, but mostly the story is really fascinating, so I just want to share the story with you real quick. So this is landscape with the fall of Icarus, and in Greek mythology, Daedalus and his son, Icarus, attempt to escape from King Minos of Crete. And Daedalus says to his son, "Let me warn you, Icarus, to take the middle way in case the moisture weighs down your wings. If you fly too low or if you go too high, the sun scorches them. Travel between the extreme." So right there is the moral of don't be too extreme. So Icarus succeeded in flying with wings made from his father Daedalus, using feathers secured by beeswax, and he ignored his father's warnings, and he chose to fly too close to the sun, melting the wax, and fell into the sea and drowned. Now, we are modern people and know that it actually gets colder the higher you go, but let's just leave that out. So what's interesting is you can see, like in the water on the side, on the right side there, his legs can be seen just below the ship. The sun already half set on the horizon is a long way away. So he didn't reach anywhere near where he was trying to get to. So this story is supposed to be about Icarus flying too close to the sun and falling because he didn't travel the middle path. But the people who have prominence in this picture actually have nothing to do with that story. So you can see the smaller one sort of right in the center there is the shepherd, and he's gazing into the air away from the ship, and he's probably looking at the missing figure of Daedalus in the sky to the left. There's this Flemish proverb, and it goes, "And the farmer continued to plow," pointing out the ignorance of people to fellow men's suffering. This painting may depict humankind's indifference to suffering by highlighting the ordinary events which continue to occur despite the unobserved, horrific death of Icarus. And then the angler continues to fish, which is another sort of saying, and that you can see the fisherman seems to just keep on fishing while a bird that can fly perches on a tree nearby as Icarus drowns. So the traditional moral of the Icarus story is this warning against excessive ambition. This is reinforced literally by foregrounding the humbler figures who appear content to fill their useful agricultural roles in life. But also you can see like Calvinism in this, right? You can see the idea of wealth is fine, but excessive wealth might lead to your downfall. So again, there's this inconspicuous wealth leads to salvation thing. If you are too ostentatious with your wealth, even though you are wealthy, you're probably not going to heaven. So Bruegel was painting at the time of Calvinism. It wasn't too early. So it definitely can be seen as a moral of do good, just be a good person. Hopefully you'll be successful. And if you are successful, that might be a sign that you're going to heaven. Okay, so these next three paintings that we're going to look at all have something associated with morality or mortality. And since we have an understanding of how this all played out, like why these genre scenes are important, or why these still lifes are important, or landscapes, either through the influence of Bruegel and his Mannerist inversion, or through the idea of inconspicuous wealth, all of these, if you look at these paintings now in that light, there's some kind of moral to them. So here we have laughing children with a cat, which is a kitten, so that's like a younger cat. And there's a moral in here, which might be, enjoy your youth while you can. Here's a still life that was painted by Rachel Reich. She was a sought-after flower painter in Amsterdam. Women were usually relegated to the lower rungs of the hierarchy of painting. So if you were a woman and you wanted to be a painter, you were probably going to be painting still lifes or other things. You weren't really going to be doing those history paintings. But this is a real fascinating painting, and it's empirical. Like it's like she was really studying flowers. And as we have already discussed with Tulip Mania, flowers were a really important part of the lives of Dutch people. So here we have a vase of flowers that's the lowest on the rung, but they represent something. It could even be sort of like the children and the kitten. Life is short, and you can even see some flowers are already kind of wilting to say there's beauty here, but also the beauty fades, and death is imminent. And by painting these flowers, or the still life, it's as if you're making this idea permanent. You're taking a thing that would eventually fall apart, and you're making it permanent in paint and form. So the lesson there, the moral in all still lifes is remember you're going to die, even though things might be beautiful now. And what does that tell you to do with your own life? This one is a painting by Emmanuel de Vita, specialized in architectural interiors. Some even called these portraits of buildings. This was the Portuguese Synagogue in Amsterdam, and it depicts an actual location, and it serves as a record of what the synagogue looked like at the time. And there's a moral in this as well. I mean, first of all, it's a synagogue, so that means it's a house of worship for Jewish people. And it reflects the Dutch sort of idea of religious tolerance. And that means other places throughout Europe, Jews were persecuted. In Spain, they were forced to convert to Catholicism. But if you're here in Amsterdam, not only do we welcome you, but we'll celebrate you in art form. I don't mean to suggest that in Amsterdam they were all enlightened and everything was peachy keen between the Jews and the Protestants. I'm just saying they were more open-minded than other places in Europe. Here we have a painting by Yann Steen, and he was prolific. He painted over 800 works of art. And the most remarkable of these were paintings of children. This is the Feast of St. Nicholas, which is Christmas, or around Christmas, and it displays, a household that's boisterous with a family get-together. And the children react in various ways to their pre-Christmas gifts. You can see some are sad, some are excited. I'm not going to tell you the moral of this because your lecture question is going to be, what do you think is the moral in this painting? Okay, we're moving on. We're going to look at two Dutch painters who in my own opinion, I would have to say are next level genre and landscape painters. And that's Vermeer and Rhys Dale. So first we'll talk about Vermeer. This painting is called The View of Delft from 1662. And he probably used the camera obscura to create his city view. And we'll talk about that in detail momentarily. The city is not actually as he depicts it. He kind of moved some iconic buildings around for better balance. And I want you to also sort of pay attention to the ratio of land to sky, because we're going to talk about that a lot with Rhys Dale as well. So this almost looks like a photograph with its pure sunlight. It's really bright. All the colors are bright. And there are little things that he does in here that are details that can be missed, but they really make this thing come alive. And we'll take a look at one of these details. So this isn't really a very big painting, so when you get really close and you look at things, amazing things happen. For example, this ship, the one that was sort of just to the right of all the buildings, as you look at it really closely, it almost looks like a ghost ship, as if it's translucent. It just happens to be that there's something strewn over the side that is the same color as the wall. But all of those highlights, those teeny tiny little highlights, really make this ship pop. And it seems like it reflects light really well. And no other painters were this detail focused. I mean, maybe miniature painters, but they weren't able to even capture light in the same way. So why was he light years ahead of his fellow painters? And how did he accomplish this? This painting of an officer and laughing girl gives us a clue. Our first hint that he was doing something different from everybody else is this officer sitting closest to us and his size in comparison to the girl. So in 1891, this American lithographer noticed something really unusual about this painting, especially when compared to another painting painted by one of his contemporaries, of an almost exact scene. This is a painting by Gerhard von Hunt. It's called the Procurus. And if you notice the size of the man in the front of the table in relation to the girl on the other side, he's almost the same size. So it almost has that sort of Franz Hals feeling where it doesn't look like they have that much separation between them and they're kind of smushed together. And this wasn't done on purpose like Franz Hals. He did this because he thought that's what it would look like if you put these two together. Now, if you look at the size of the man and the woman and the officer that Vermeer painted, and you put that side by side with Honthorst's, you'll see that artists before Vermeer painted what they thought was correct, but Vermeer painted what he actually saw. This is coupled with the fact that he was really close friends with one of Delft's most famous lens makers in the city, Leeuwenhoek. So the idea is that the reason that he understood this spatial relationship or all of these highlights on these boats, etc., is because he was using some kind of special lensed tool to get him to see reality as opposed to what other painters were assuming was reality. The leading theory is that he used a camera obscura, and it was first mentioned in ancient Greece by Aristotle. How it works, they have the best guess about how Vermeer did this. So first of all, a camera obscura is a darkened room with a pinhole, and then like light enters through that pinhole, and then it flips the image upside down on the opposite wall. And the size of the pinhole affects the focus or the image. So what they think that Vermeer did was that he had some kind of device like this, which was either kind of a room in which he sat in, or he had a device that he used lenses with his buddy Leeuwenhoek, and he projected the image onto a piece of waxy strip of paper, and then he would draw the entire thing. It was see-through, and then he would take that waxy paper and he would press it face down onto a canvas, and he would pull it off, and then it left impressions of the outlines. and then he would paint within those lines. Then the question becomes, does it matter? I mean, this might be the reason that Vermeer's paintings are so resonant with modern viewers, is that he was able to capture subtle gradations of light and it looks almost photographic. But he still had to set up the scene and spend thousands of hours painting them. He only made 36 paintings. He still captures the fleeting moment in time, and it's thoughtful in a not overly sentimental way. And to sort of make the point is this painting of woman holding a balance. And at first glance, it's just a lady standing at a table in front of a window with a painting behind her. But if you look closer, the woman is pregnant and she holds a goldsmith's balance, which is used to weigh metal and coins. And then next to the window, we see all of the luxuries, the jewelry, the money. The outside world is associated with public space and business and commerce. And behind the woman is a painting of the Last Judgment, which would have been rare in a Protestant home. I think there might be some Catholicism in Vermeer's background. I'm not really sure. The theme of balance or measuring suits the main subject of the painting. So in the Last Judgment, Christ judges the dead. We've seen this in Rubens' painting, the super fleshy stuff that's happening, and it's determined who goes to heaven and who doesn't. And on one side, the side where his hand is raised, I guess it's his right side, those are the ones going to heaven, and the one on the left are where they're all falling to hell. And the Archangel Michael is often depicted with scales in these scenes. So we have two scales. We have the woman's scales, and we have Christ weighing the good and the bad. And the question is, what might she be judging or weighing? And we also have the unborn child in this picture. So many art historians have interpreted this painting as a mother contemplating what the future of her child may be. What would be best, a contemplative life or an active business life? Success financially or success spiritually? And is there a balance between those two? And that's sort of another symbol of Calvinism, is this being wealthy but also leading a good life. Those are the ones that are chosen are going to heaven. So there you have it, this amazing and really thoughtful image of a woman who's thinking about the future of her unborn child, and all of these symbols and subtle nods to what's better. And then you have just the technical virtuosity of Vermeer. These are intimate, small kind of paintings. You can really sort of fall into them, and they're amazingly detailed. And is that important? Is it important that he might have used a camera obscura? Yeah, but it's not a bad thing, perhaps. It was a way for him to separate himself from his contemporaries. I mean, here's a perfect example. There was a guy named Peter de Hooch who painted very similar scenes to Vermeer's. And if Vermeer wasn't around, de Hooch would be the one we're talking about. But there's something a little off in his paintings, and he might have used a camera obscura and he just didn't use it as well. He didn't have the patience that Vermeer had, but there's something almost photographic about Vermeer's. And that's really kind of astounding when you think of the fact that it was 1640 or something. So when comparing Peter de Hooch and Vermeer, you get not just this quieter, more contemplative image with Vermeer, but just technically sound. And it makes you fall deeper into the painting, as opposed to de Hooch. If you see like a problem or a mistake, then it kind of takes you out of the scene. Here's Vermeer next to another contemporary, Gabriel Metsu, and he was almost as amazing as Vermeer. And you can see that these scenes are very similar in that there's like a woman who's reading a letter, probably from her husband, and the map behind the woman in the Vermeer thing is the sign that tells you that he's off traveling or trading, and then the woman pulling the curtain back from the painting that might be the ship that her husband is on. And then there's that little dog that refers to fidelity, and it does look like the woman in the Vermeer painting is pregnant, and so she might be hoping that her husband comes back. You know, there are stories to these, and if you just sort of look at them, there's something amazingly spectacular about the technical virtuosity of Vermeer, even though the Metsu one is really amazing too. So what am I trying to say? Vermeer is awesome, I guess. That's kind of the bottom line. Vermeer is awesome. So let's finish with Rhys Dale. And I want you to think back to when I told you keep that sky in mind when we were looking at the view of Delft. Because I've given you a lot of art historical context, and I've given you a lot of historical context. We've talked about Calvinism or the tulip mania or the slave trade. But what Rhys Dale gives us is geographical context, and it's fascinating to me. So the Netherlands are like a low marsh formed by the deltas of the Rhine and the Maas rivers, and a third of the country was actually below sea level, and it was reclaimed behind dikes and drained through pumps run by windmills. And in such a flat environment, the horizon seems to lie below one's feet, so the sky overhead dominates the view. And this is a quality that sets Dutch landscapes apart from other nations, is that the amount of space devoted to the moist ocean air and the sun glowing through the ever-present clouds with their emphasis on atmosphere. These might actually be better called skyscapes. So that's kind of the geographical reason why there's so much sky, but there's probably a second reason. And I want to let you guys figure out what the second reason for the giant skies are in Dutch landscape painting. And I want you to consider all of the things that we've talked about, and this will be another one of your lecture questions. All right, so that concludes Holland. It was a long one, but we made it through it. And next is the French.